See, fear is loud, discernment is quiet, which is why so many people miss it. And the tragedy is that many people never learn to hear that quiet voice because they never gave themselves the conditions necessary to develop it. And those conditions are called solitude. Solitude is where you become acquainted with yourself, where you begin to understand the difference between your own emotions and the emotions that other people project onto you. That's where you learn what your intuition actually sounds beneath all the noise of other people's expectation. Without that relationship with yourself, confusion becomes much easier to manufacture. You start questioning your own perception. You start overriding your own instincts. You stay longer in situations that quietly drain you because nothing has happened that feels dramatic enough to justify leaving. Listen, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one most people spend their entire lives avoiding, and that is the relationship with yourself. You see, we live in a world that treats solitude like a failure. If you're not attached to someone, people worry. If you spend too much time alone, people assume something must be wrong. If you genuinely enjoy your own company, people become uncomfortable, as if a human being whole on your own is somehow suspicious. So people rush into relationships, into constant conversations, into endless distractions, not necessarily because they found the right person, but because silence feels unbearable. Because the moment the noise stops, something else begins. You start hearing yourself. Your thoughts becomes clearer. Your emotions become more precise. Your perception becomes sharper. And that can be confronting because solitude removes the buffer between you and your own awareness. There is no one left to impress, no one left to perform for, no one left to blame for what you feel. Just you and the truth of your own inner life. But what most people do not realize is that solitude is not simply about being alone. Solitude is where discernment is built. It is where you learn the internal language of your own mind and body. When you spend enough time with yourself, honestly and without distraction, something subtle begins to happen. You start learning your own baseline. You learn what calm feels like inside your own body. You learn what clarity feels like in your own mind. You learn the quiet rhythm of your own emotional life when no one else is influencing it. And once you know that baseline, something extraordinary becomes possible. You begin to notice when something does not belong to you. For example, a tension that appears suddenly, a subtle discomfort that wasn't there before, that quiet tightening somewhere in your chest when someone speaks. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. No argument, no betrayal, no obvious crisis. Yet, something inside you has already stepped back. Not loudly, but quietly. Almost like a small internal withdrawal. Most people ignore this moment because we have been trained to believe that perception must come with evidence. We are taught to be fair, to be patient, to give the benefit of the doubt, to avoid jumping to conclusions. So when that quiet signal appears, we explain it away. Maybe I'm overthinking, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe it's nothing. But the body does not operate on courtroom standards. The body does not wait for proof. It reads patterns. The body notices when questions are met with deflection instead of engagement. It notices when fairness suddenly provokes hostility. It notices when tone shifts while the words remain polite. It notices when someone becomes more invested in winning than in understanding. It notices when structure begins to replace care. These things are often too subtle for the mind to immediately articulate. The mind prefers clear stories. It wants a villain, a reason, a moment you can point to. But the earliest stages of danger rarely arrives like that. It arrives quietly, as misalignment, as a loss of a certain kind of openness. You are still present, you are still trying, you are still giving the benefit of the doubt, but something in you stops leaning forward. See, fear is loud, discernment is quiet, which is why so many people miss it. And the tragedy is that many people never learn to hear that quiet voice because they never gave themselves the conditions necessary to develop it. And those conditions are called solitude. Solitude is where you become acquainted with yourself, where you begin to understand the difference between your own emotions and the emotions that other people project onto you. That's where you learn what your intuition actually sounds beneath all the noise of other people's expectation. Without that relationship with yourself, confusion becomes much easier to manufacture. You start questioning your own perception. You start overriding your own instincts. You stay longer in situations that quietly drain you because nothing has happened that feels dramatic enough to justify leaving. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your internal clarity erodes, not because you're weak, but because you were never given the space to build discernment. Discernment is not built in chaos. It is built in stillness. It is built in the long, honest conversations you have with yourself when no one else is around. But many people avoid those conversations, not because they dislike solitude, but because they are afraid of what might surface when the distractions disappear, when the phone is down, when the room is quiet, when there is nothing left to distract you from that simple question: what do I actually feel? And that question might be one of the most important questions a person can learn to answer, because the moment you become deeply familiar with your own inner landscape, it becomes much harder for anyone to rearrange it without you noticing. Many people remember that moment later, the moment something inside them quietly stepped back, the moment they felt something shift and talked themselves out of it. This is one of the reasons I wrote my new book, When Nothing is Wrong but Everything Feels Off. Because one of the most confusing experiences a person can have in relationships is that exact moment. Nothing is obviously wrong. There is no crisis you can point to, no dramatic betrayal, nothing that would immediately convince everyone else that something has changed, yet something inside you has already shifted. You can still list reasons to stay, but your body already stopped consenting. This book is not about diagnosing people. It is about documenting patterns, the quiet mechanics of power in intimate relationships, how control can appear through tone, timing, and structure rather than obvious aggression, how reasonable arrangements can sometimes be designed to immobilize, how fairness can provoke hostility, how silence itself can become a strategy. Most importantly, it is about restoring something many people have slowly learned to doubt: their own perception. You do not need to have experienced obvious harm to recognize when something feels wrong. Often the body recognizes the pattern long before the mind finds the language for it. And the purpose of this work is simple: to help you trust that perception again, without drama, without shame, without requiring you to prove what you already know. When Nothing is Wrong but Everything Feels Off releases on March 13 and is available now for pre-order. If you've ever experienced that quiet moment where everything looked normal on the surface, but something inside you had already stepped back, this book was written for you. Because clarity does not begin when everything finally collapses. Clarity begins the moment you start trusting what you noticed first.